The boy approached the coffin with trembling hands, ready to say a final goodbye to his mother. But as his eyes fell on what was hidden beneath the folds of her shroud, his heart raced, and the entire funeral erupted into chaos. What he discovered changed everything. Do you ever wonder what it costs to keep going when life keeps tearing you down? Saoirse muttered to herself, her voice a whisper swallowed by the emptiness of the dark underpass. Her fingers clutched a threadbare blanket as the cold concrete beneath her seeped into her bones. But Saoirse didn't cry. She hadn't cried in days, not because she was strong, but because there was nothing left in her to shed. When she was a child, Saoirse never imagined her life would spiral like this. She grew up with stories of hope, told by a mother who believed in miracles even as their cupboards ran bare. "You can become anything, Saoirse," her mother would say, her hands rough from years of scrubbing other people's laundry. But dreams didn't pay for food, and believing didn't keep you warm at night. Her teenage years came and went in a haze of part-time jobs and aching feet. By the time she was 20, Saoirse was well-versed in survival, juggling long shifts as a waitress with side gigs as a cleaner. She was always moving, always trying to outrun the crushing weight of poverty that seemed to cling to her like a shadow. One day, "I'll get out of this," she'd tell herself, scrubbing grease off counters at the diner where she worked. "One day, I'll have my own place, my own life. Nobody will tell me what to do or take what's mine." And she did. Slowly, painstakingly, Saoirse clawed her way out of the abyss. It started small, saving tips in an old coffee can, taking night classes at the community college, learning the ins and outs of business from books she borrowed at the library. It took her years, but Saoirse built something real. By 32, she owned a catering company with contracts across the city, a portfolio of real estate investments, and a reputation as a tenacious, self-made entrepreneur. But success didn't dull the edges of her past. It sharpened them. "She's tough, but soft in all the wrong places," people would whisper. Saoirse knew what they meant. She'd spent her life fighting to prove she could be strong, but her heart, her foolish, trusting heart, remained an open wound. It was always the same story. Men came into her life with charming smiles and promises that sounded too good to be true. And they always were. There was Ethan, who took off with her savings when she was 25, leaving her nearly bankrupt. Then Marcus, whose idea of love included controlling every decision she made until she couldn't breathe without asking his permission. Saoirse swore after Marcus that she'd never let herself fall again. "I'm done with love," she told her best friend Mia over a bottle of cheap wine. "It's a trap. It takes everything you have and leaves you with nothing." Mia had nodded, but her eyes were sad. "Not everyone's like that, Saoirse. There's got to be someone out there who'll see you for who you are." Saoirse laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet room. "If there is, he better come with a contract and a background check." Still, the loneliness lingered. It crept into the corners of her life, whispering doubts in her ear when the lights were off and the city had gone to sleep. The loneliness didn't leave her, but it did take on a new shape when Denver walked into her life. At first he was just another co-worker, a polite man with a quick smile and an easy way of making people feel comfortable. He was the kind of person who always seemed to know the right thing to say, whether it was to diffuse a tense meeting or lighten the mood after a long day. Saoirse had noticed him, of course, but she hadn't given him much thought. Men like Denver, she'd learned, were best admired from a distance. Still, it was hard not to pay attention when he started going out of his way to help her. "You've got a sharp mind, Sayasha," he told her one evening as they worked late in the office. "But you're carrying too much on your own. Let me take some of this off your plate." She hesitated. "I'm used to doing things myself," she said, a little too quickly. "I know," he replied with a soft laugh. "But even the strongest people need a break sometimes. Trust me, it's okay to let someone help." Sayasha didn't know why, but she let him. It wasn't much at first, just a few minor tasks he took over, a few late-night brainstorming sessions that made her feel less alone in her struggles. But Denver had a way of making her believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight every battle by herself. Soon, it wasn't just work he was helping with. He started showing up with little surprises. A coffee just the way she liked it, a bouquet of flowers for no reason at all, a box of chocolates left on her desk with a note that simply said, "Thinking of you." Sayasha couldn't remember the last time someone had done something like that for her. "You don't have to keep doing this," she told him one day, her voice softer than she meant it to be. "I know," he said with that same easy smile. "But I want to." For the first time in years, Sayasha felt herself begin to relax. She still remembered the scars from her past, still carried the weight of those who had hurt her, but Denver's kindness was like a balm she hadn't realized she needed. Even Isaac noticed the change. "You seem lighter," he said one evening as they sat on her couch, sharing a take-out pizza like they had done 1,000 times before. "Do I?" Sayasha asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Isaac narrowed his eyes. "Is it about that guy at work? What's his name? Denver?" Sayasha laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "He's just a friend." "Uh-huh," Isaac said, his tone skeptical. "I'm just saying, be careful, okay? Guys like that don't come around without a reason." Sayasha rolled her eyes. "Not everyone has an angle, Isaac. Some people are just good." "Maybe," he said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But you've been through enough, Rach. I just don't want to see you get hurt again." She appreciated his concern, but she brushed it off. Denver wasn't like the others. He didn't push her, didn't demand more than she was willing to give. If anything, he made her feel safe, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing. When Denver started helping with her business, Sayasha was surprised by how much he knew. He had an eye for efficiency and a knack for finding solutions she hadn't considered. Under his guidance, her operations ran smoother, her profits grew, and for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. "You're incredible. You know that?" Denver told her one night after they had wrapped up a particularly tricky project. Sayasha felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have," he said. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I'm just glad I get to be part of your world." His words stayed with her long after he left. Still, Isaac's warnings lingered in the back of her mind, a small but insistent voice she couldn't quite silence. "He's too perfect," Isaac had said the last time they talked about Denver. "Nobody's that perfect." Sayasha didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to believe that this man who had brought so much light into her life could have anything but good intentions. But late at night, when the world was quiet and her thoughts were loud, she found herself wondering if Isaac might be right. Sayasha pushed the doubts aside as best she could. Denver had been nothing but good to her, and her life had changed in ways she hadn't thought possible since he'd come along. For once, it felt like things were going her way. So when he called her one late afternoon and asked her to meet him outside the office, she didn't think much of it. But as she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she froze. A small crowd had gathered, and at its center was Denver, standing beneath the warm glow of the setting sun. He was grinning, looking both nervous and excited, and behind him stood a quartet of musicians tuning their instruments. Isoersa's breath caught. "Soersa!" he called, his voice carrying over the hum of the city. People turned to look as he walked toward her, holding a single red rose in his hand. He took her hand gently, as if it were something fragile, and guided her to the middle of the gathering. "What are you?" she started, but Denver shook his head. "Just wait," he whispered, and with a nod to the musicians, the familiar notes of her favorite song began to play. Soersa felt her cheeks flush as the melody wrapped around her. She glanced around at the curious onlookers, suddenly self-conscious, but then Denver knelt down on one knee, and all her attention snapped back to him. "Soersa," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You are the most incredible woman I've ever met. You've brought light into my life in ways I didn't know I needed. I can't imagine a future without you in it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a glittering diamond ring. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Soersa couldn't move. The world seemed to still, and all she could hear was the pounding of her heart and the soft strains of the music behind her. She hadn't expected this. Not so soon. Not like this. But as she looked into Denver's hopeful eyes, she felt something in her chest loosen. "Yes," she said, the word barely a whisper at first. Then louder, with a wide smile breaking across her face. "Yes, Denver, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Denver slid the ring onto her finger before standing and pulling her into a warm embrace. Soersa felt a wave of happiness she hadn't felt in years, a feeling so pure and overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. Later that evening, Soersa shared the news with Isaac. She expected him to be happy for her, to share in the joy she was feeling. But his reaction was more reserved than she'd hoped. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Of course I'm sure," Soersa replied, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "Denver's been nothing but good to me. Why can't you just be happy for me, Isaac?" Isaac sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that I don't want you to be happy, Soersa. This is all happening so fast. Are you really ready for this?" Soersa looked down at the ring on her finger, the diamond catching the light. "I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I've found someone who truly cares about me. Can't you trust me on this?" Isaac hesitated before nodding. "Okay. If this is what you want, then I'm happy for you. But promise me you'll be careful, all right? Just keep your eyes open." "I will," Soersa said, though she couldn't keep the disappointment out of her voice. Why couldn't he just let her be happy? The next few months passed in a blur of wedding plans and work. Soersa threw herself into the preparations with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years, and Denver was right there beside her, helping with every detail. It was during this time that Soersa noticed something strange. She wasn't feeling quite like herself, exhausted, nauseous, and unusually emotional. At first, she thought it was the stress of the wedding, but a trip to the doctor confirmed what she hadn't dared to hope. She was pregnant. Soersa couldn't contain her excitement. After everything she'd been through, this felt like a gift, a sign that her future with Denver was meant to be. She decided to tell him in a special way, planning an intimate dinner at her apartment to share the news. That evening, Soersa lit candles and set the table with care. She'd placed the ultrasound photo in a small box, wrapping it neatly with a bow, and as Denver sat across from her, she slid it toward him with a smile. "Open it," she said, her voice filled with anticipation. Denver raised an eyebrow but complied, untying the bow and lifting the lid. For a moment, he stared at the contents in silence, and Saoirse's heart swelled as she waited for his reaction. But instead of joy, a strange look crossed his face. Shock, then something colder. He set the box down and leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Saoirse," he said finally, his voice low and measured, "I can't do this." Saoirse blinked, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" Denver let out a slow breath, looking anywhere but at her. "I'm married, Saoirse. I have a family, 4 kids, a wife who loves me. I thought I could handle this, but I can't. This isn't my child, Saoirse. It's yours." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless. She stared at him, her mind struggling to make sense of what she'd just heard. Before she could respond, Denver stood and grabbed his coat. "I'm sorry," he said, though his tone held no warmth. "But this is over. Don't contact me again." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Saoirse sitting at the table, her world crashing down around her. Saoirse sat frozen, staring at the empty chair where Denver had been moments before. The candlelight flickered on the walls, casting distorted shadows that seemed to mock her. The little box with the ultrasound photo sat untouched on the table, a cruel reminder of what had just happened. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She reached for the edge of the table, gripping it as if it could anchor her in the storm of emotions that threatened to pull her under. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak, all of it swirled together, leaving her feeling hollow and raw. The weight of Denver's betrayal bore down on her, bringing with it memories she thought she'd buried. Ethan's lies, Marcus's control. It was as if every wound from her past had been reopened at once. "Why?" she whispered to no one, her voice cracking under the strain. Tears blurred her vision, and she swiped at them angrily, but they kept coming. She didn't know how long she sat there, lost in the haze of her pain, but eventually a familiar voice broke through. Saoirse, are you home?" It was Isaac. She couldn't bring herself to answer, but Isaac found her anyway. He walked into the dining room and stopped short when he saw her. His eyes darted from the untouched food to the discarded box on the table, then to Saoirse's tear-streaked face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low and steady, though his concern was clear. Saoirse tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She shook her head, unable to explain. Isaac sighed and pulled a chair closer, sitting down across from her. "It's Denver, isn't it? I knew there was something off about him." Hearing his name was like ripping off a bandage, and the tears came harder. She didn't have the strength to deny it, so she nodded. Isaac leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Whatever he did, Saoirse, he's not worth this. You're stronger than this. You've been through worse, and you've come out the other side. You'll do it again." For a moment, she wanted to push him away, to tell him he didn't understand. But the sincerity in his voice, the unwavering support, chipped away at the walls she'd built. "It's not just me anymore, Isaac," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant." Isaac's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "And he walked away? Just like that?" "He's married," Saoirse said bitterly, the words tasting like ash. "He has kids. I was nothing but a distraction. Isaac's jaw tightened, and for a moment Saoirse thought he might explode. But he didn't. Instead, he reached across the table and took her hand in his. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. "You have me, and we'll get through this together." In the weeks that followed, Saoirse leaned heavily on Isaac's support. He became her rock, helping her pick up the pieces of her shattered life. At first, every day was a battle just to get out of bed, to face the reality of what had happened. But slowly, she began to find her footing again. Her pregnancy, though unplanned, became her reason to keep going. Each flutter, each kick reminded her that she wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was living for the little life growing inside her, a life that deserved love and security, no matter how it came into the world. Isaac was with her every step of the way, accompanying her to doctor's appointments and helping her prepare for the baby. He even started researching cribs and car seats, his practical nature kicking into high gear. "You're going to be a great mum," he told her one evening as they assembled a bassinet in her living room. Saoirse smiled, though her eyes were tired. "I hope so. He's going to need all the love he can get." "And he'll have it," Isaac assured her. "From both of us." The day Felix was born, Saoirse felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. She held him close, marveling at the tiny fingers that curled around hers, the soft cries that filled the room. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Denver, not the pain of the past, only Felix. Shh, he was her world now, her reason for everything. Isaac arrived a few hours later, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hand and a wide grin on his face. "Well, look at you," he said, leaning down to get a better look at the baby. "He's perfect, Saoirse. Absolutely perfect." Saoirse laughed softly, her heart full. "He is, isn't he?" Isaac placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Rach. I know you do." As the months turned into years, Saoirse poured herself into raising Felix. She worked tirelessly to provide for him, juggling the demands of motherhood and her business with a determination that left little room for self-pity. There were hard days, of course, days when she felt overwhelmed and exhausted, days when the loneliness crept back in. But then Felix would laugh or reach for her hand, and everything else faded away. She taught him to be kind, to be strong, to face the world with courage, no matter how difficult it might seem. And, as he grew, Saoirse found that he was teaching her just as much. Saoirse watched Felix grow with a mix of pride and quiet sorrow. At 10 years old, he had his mother's resilience and his Uncle Isaac's steady sense of duty. He was a bright boy, quick to smile and full of questions about the world around him. Saoirse poured her love into him, knowing that every hug, every story, every moment shared was a gift she couldn't take for granted. She had always been meticulous about shielding him from the darker parts of her past. Felix didn't ask about his father often, and, when he did, Saoirse would redirect the conversation, focusing instead on the love they shared as a family. Isaac, ever the protector, made sure Felix never felt the absence of a father figure. But even as her son thrived, Saoirse's body began to betray her. It started with small things, fatigue that wouldn't lift no matter how much she rested, a dull ache in her joints that lingered longer than it should. She brushed it off at first, blaming stress or overwork. "I'm just tired," she told Isaac one evening when he noticed her wincing as she got up from the couch. "Tired doesn't make you look like that," Isaac replied, his tone sharper than he intended. "You need to get checked out, Saoirse." She waved him off, but the concern in his eyes lingered with her. When the pain worsened, spreading to her chest and leaving her gasping for breath after simple tasks, she finally relented and scheduled an appointment. The hospital was a place Saoirse had come to associate with fleeting hope and crushing reality. Sitting in the sterile, cold room, she waited for the doctor to deliver the results. The words came softly, as if that would soften the blow. Stage 4, terminal. Saoirse's world tilted. The doctor spoke of options, treatment to extend her time, ways to manage the pain, but the only thing she could hear was the clock ticking down. When she returned home that evening, Isaac was waiting for her, his face etched with worry. "What did they say?" he asked, standing as she entered. Saoirse tried to keep her voice steady, but it broke under the weight of the truth. "It's cancer, and it's bad, Isaac. I don't have much time." For a moment, Isaac didn't say anything. Then he crossed the room and wrapped her in a tight embrace, his grip firm as if he could hold her together through sheer will. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "You're not doing this alone." In the weeks that followed, Saoirse put every ounce of strength she had left into preparing for Felix's future. She met with lawyers, finalized her will, and transferred control of her business to Isaac, trusting him to safeguard everything she'd built for her son. At night, when the house was quiet, she would sit by Felix's bed and watch him sleep. She wanted to memorize every detail: his soft curls, the way his lips parted slightly as he dreamed, the small rise and fall of his chest. One evening, as she tucked him in, Felix opened his eyes and looked at her. "Mom?" he said, his voice small. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you okay? You look sad." Saoirse swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile. "I'm just tired, honey. But I'm okay, I promise." Saoirse had thought she was prepared for anything, but nothing could have braced her for Denver's return. He showed up at the hospital one afternoon, slick as ever, with a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a forced look of regret on his face. "I heard you weren't doing well," he said, standing awkwardly at the foot of her bed. "I wanted to check in." Saoirse's jaw tightened. "Why now, Denver? After all these years, why bother?" He sighed, playing the part of the remorseful man. "I made mistakes, Saoirse. I see that now. I want to make things right." Before Saoirse could respond, the door opened and Felix stepped in, holding the get-well card he'd made in art class. His eyes darted between his mother and the strange man, confusion clouding his face. "Who's that?" he asked. Denver crouched down, putting on a smile that Saoirse knew was as fake as his apology. "I'm your dad, Felix." The words sent a chill through the room. No, Saoirse watched as Felix's face twisted in disbelief, then anger. "You're not my dad," he said firmly, clutching the card against his chest. "I don't need you." Denver stood, his expression hardening. "We'll see about that," he muttered, and with that he left. Saoirse knew Denver's appearance wasn't a coincidence. He wasn't there out of guilt or love. He wanted something, and she feared she knew exactly what it was. "Isaac," she said later that night, her voice trembling. "We need to be ready. Denver's going to try to take Felix." Isaac's face darkened. "He doesn't have a chance, Saoirse. I won't let him near Felix, not while I'm around." Saoirse nodded, but the fear in her chest didn't ease. When Saoirse passed a few months later, the grief was unbearable. Isaac held Felix close as the boy cried, his small frame shaking with sobs that echoed through the empty house. The funeral was a somber affair, a gathering of friends and family bound by shared grief and the gaping absence of Saoirse's warmth. Felix stood beside Isaac, clutching his uncle's hand tightly, his young face pale but composed. Isaac, ever the protective figure, kept a watchful eye on the room, his shoulders taut with a tension that refused to fade. It was when the ceremony reached its quietest moment, a lull as the pastor spoke about Saoirse's strength and love, that Denver arrived. He walked in without hesitation, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor as the soft murmurs of prayer faded into silence. "Excuse me," Denver announced, his voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "I have something to say." Heads turned, confusion and unease rippling through the crowd. Isaac's jaw tightened as he stepped slightly in front of Felix, instinctively shielding the boy. "This is not just a funeral," Denver continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "This is also about setting things right. I am Felix's father, and it's time I took responsibility for what's mine." The air thickened with shock. Felix's small hand trembled in Isaac's grasp, and the boy pressed himself closer to his uncle. "You've got some nerve," Isaac said, his voice low but filled with barely restrained anger. Denver smirked, pulling a sheaf of papers from his briefcase. "I came prepared," he said smugly. "This isn't just a claim, it's legal proof. Saoirse's assets and custody of Felix are rightfully mine." The room erupted into chaos. Friends and family murmured in disbelief, their faces a mix of outrage and confusion. Isaac stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can waltz in here and lay claim to her life, to her son, after everything you've done?" Isaac's voice shook with fury. Denver raised a hand, feigning calm. "I'm only doing what's right. Felix deserves to know his father, and I have every intention of providing for him. The courts will back me up on this." Felix, too young to fully grasp the complexities of Denver's actions, but old enough to sense the danger, felt his chest tighten with fear. He wanted to disappear, to crawl into a safe place where none of this could touch him. But as the shouting grew louder, something in him stirred, a determination to help, to protect the family that had always protected him. Slipping away from Isaac's side, Felix began to weave through the crowd. No one noticed him, their attention fixed on the confrontation unfolding at the front of the room. "Stay out of this, Denver," Isaac was saying, his voice cutting through the din. "Saoirse's wishes were clear. You're not wanted here, and you're not taking anything from her, or from Felix." Denver's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Wishes mean nothing without evidence. And as far as I'm concerned, that boy needs a real father, not a bitter uncle clinging to scraps." Felix didn't hear the rest. His heart pounded as he darted toward the quiet corner where Saoirse's casket lay, draped in soft white fabric and surrounded by flowers. Something about it drew him, a pull he couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. As he reached the casket, Felix's eyes caught a glimpse of something unusual, a corner of paper peeking out from beneath the lining. He hesitated, his small fingers hovering over the edge of the fabric. The voices of the argument faded into the background as a strange sense of calm washed over him. With careful hands, Felix lifted the fabric and pulled the paper free. It was an envelope, sealed and marked with his mother's handwriting. His name was written on the front in neat, deliberate letters. "Felix," it read, "for when you need it most." Felix's breath hitched. Though he couldn't fully understand its significance, he knew this was important, something his mother had left for him to find. Clutching the envelope tightly, Felix ran back toward the front of the room. Isaac and Denver were still arguing, their words sharp and heated. but Felix's voice cut through them with surprising strength. "Uncle Isaac," he called, holding the envelope high. "I found something." The room stilled as Felix approached, all eyes now on the small boy with the envelope clutched in his hands. Isaac knelt down, his face softening as he took it from Felix. "What is it, buddy?" he asked gently. "It's from Mom," Felix whispered. "I found it in the casket." Isaac's hands trembled as he broke the seal, pulling out a set of papers. His eyes scanned the document, widening with every line he read. "This is it," he said, standing tall and turning to face Denver. "This is Saoirse's original will. It's notarized, signed, and leaves no room for interpretation. She made it clear, Felix stays with me, and you get nothing." Denver's confidence wavered, his smug demeanor replaced by uncertainty. "Let me see that," he demanded, stepping forward. Isaac held the papers out of reach. "Not a chance. I'll let the police and the courts handle you from here." As if on cue, two officers who had been called earlier stepped into the room. Isaac handed them the document, explaining the situation while Denver sputtered protests and excuses. Within minutes, the truth of Denver's forgery came to light. The officers placed him in handcuffs, his arrogant facade crumbling as they led him away. "This isn't over," Denver shouted, his voice echoing through the room. But his words carried no weight now, his power stripped away by the evidence Saoirse had left behind. Denver's arrest marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. Isaac knew there would be legal battles ahead, documents to file, hearings to attend. But for now, he focused on one thing: giving Felix a sense of normalcy. In the days following the funeral, the house felt impossibly quiet. Saoirse's absence was like a missing piece of the foundation, and both Isaac and Felix were learning how to navigate life without her steady presence. Isaac stepped into the role of guardian naturally, though not without moments of doubt. He'd always been Saoirse's younger brother, leaning on her strength more often than he liked to admit. Now, he had to be that strength for Felix. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Felix turned to Isaac with a question that had been weighing on his mind. "Do you think Mom knew everything would turn out okay?" he asked, his voice small and tentative. Isaac took a deep breath, considering his answer. "I think your mom did everything she could to make sure we'd be okay. She loved you more than anything, Felix. That's why she fought so hard, to protect you." Felix nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I miss her," he whispered. "I do too," Isaac said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you know what? She's still with us in a way. Every time you smile, or when you do something brave, that's her. She's a part of you." The boy leaned into his uncle, and Isaac wrapped an arm around him, holding him close. Months turned into years, and Felix began to grow into a young man. Isaac marveled at the boy's resilience and determination, traits that so clearly came from Saoirse. At school, Felix excelled in his studies and found solace in basketball, a sport that allowed him to channel his energy and emotions. Isaac attended every game, cheering louder than anyone else in the stands. "You've got your mom's grit," Isaac told him, after one particularly tough match where Felix had led his team to a last-minute victory. "She never gave up, and neither do you." Felix beamed at the praise, a flicker of pride lighting up his face. When Felix turned 18, it was more than just a milestone. It was a turning point. The weight of responsibility Saoirse had left for him now rested squarely on his shoulders. Isaac, standing beside him as always, handed over the keys to Saoirse's business with a solemnity that made the moment feel monumental. "This is yours now," Isaac said, placing a firm hand on Felix's shoulder. Your mum built it from nothing, and she always believed you'd take it further than she ever could. Felix turned the keys over in his hand, the cold metal an almost tangible reminder of Saoirse's hard work and sacrifices. I hope I can make her proud, he said quietly. You already have, Isaac replied. The first months were overwhelming. Felix spent long hours at the office poring over contracts, financial reports, and the intricacies of the business Saoirse had built. It wasn't just about profit. Saoirse's business had been a lifeline for struggling families in the community, offering affordable, nutritious meals and support to those who needed it most. Isaac, ever the steadying presence, worked alongside him, offering guidance without overstepping. Don't just think like a businessman, he advised one day, as Felix wrestled with a difficult decision about raising prices. Think like your mum. She never let numbers come before people. Felix nodded, the weight of that lesson settling on him. He made the choice to keep prices fair, finding other ways to cut costs without compromising the mission of the business. Word spread quickly about the young man stepping into his mother's shoes, and the community responded with admiration. Customers who had been loyal to Saoirse now found the same warmth and fairness in Felix, and new clients were drawn by his dedication and authenticity. One afternoon, Felix was sorting through old files when he came across a letter in Saoirse's handwriting. It was dated a few weeks before her death, addressed to him. Dear Felix, if you're reading this, it means you've stepped into the role I always believed you could handle. I know it won't be easy, but remember that you carry my strength, and you have your Uncle Isaac's wisdom to guide you. This business was never just about making money. It was about making a difference. Treat people with kindness, even when it's hard. Stand up for what's right, even when it costs you something. And most importantly, never forget that you are loved. I'm so proud of you, my son. Tears blurred Felix's vision as he read the words. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer, vowing to carry Saoirse's lessons with him every day. Under Felix's leadership, the business flourished. He expanded their operations, opening new locations in underserved areas and creating job opportunities for local residents. But it wasn't just about growth. Felix made sure to honor Saoirse's mission of community support. He started programs to provide free meals to families in crisis and scholarships for young people pursuing careers in the culinary arts. Every initiative bore Saoirse's name, a tribute to the woman whose vision had sparked it all. Felix also made time to mentor younger employees, sharing the lessons he'd learned from his mother and Isaac. It's not just about where you start, he often told them. It's about where you're willing to go. Meanwhile, Denver remained behind bars, his charm and manipulation useless in the face of cold, hard consequences. Felix heard bits and pieces about him through the years, how he'd tried to appeal his sentence, how he spent his days isolated from the world he'd once tried to control. But Felix didn't let Denver occupy space in his mind. Forgiveness was something he reserved for those who deserved it, and while he didn't harbor hate for Denver, he also didn't allow himself to dwell on the man's choices. That chapter's closed, he told Isaac one evening when Denver's name came up in conversation. I'm focused on what's ahead. Isaac smiled, his pride in Felix evident. Your mum would have liked that answer. As the years passed, Felix became a man known for his integrity and compassion. The boy who had once clung to his uncle's side at a funeral was now a leader, a beacon of hope for those around him. He never forgot where he came from, and he made sure no one else forgot either. Saoirse's story was a cornerstone of his success, a reminder that strength and kindness could overcome even the darkest moments. On the anniversary of Saoirse's death, Felix made his way to her grave, a bouquet of sunflowers in hand. He knelt by the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of her name with his fingers. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "It's been a while." He placed the flowers gently at the base of the headstone, their bright yellow petals a stark contrast to the grey stone. "I hope I'm doing things the way you'd want," he continued. "The business is thriving, and Isaac's been amazing. Like he always is. And me? I'm trying. I'm trying to be the kind of person you'd be proud of." Felix sat back on his heels, letting the silence stretch around him. "I think about you every day," he admitted. "When things get hard, or when I don't know what to do. I try to imagine what you'd say. And somehow, I always find the answer." A breeze stirred the trees overhead, rustling the leaves like a soft whisper. Felix smiled, a quiet sense of peace settling over him. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything, for believing in me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living. I'll keep making you proud, I promise." As he stood to leave, Felix felt a warmth in his chest, as if Saoirse's presence was still with him, guiding him as she always had. He walked away from the grave, his steps steady and sure, ready to face the future with the strength and love his mother had instilled in him. The path ahead was his to shape, but he knew he would never walk it alone. Saoirse's legacy lived on in every choice he made, every kindness he extended, and every life he touched. The story of Saoirse and Felix is a moving portrait of resilience, love, and the struggle to overcome adversity. From Saoirse's sacrifices to build a better future for her son, to the way Felix grows and honors his mother's legacy, this narrative highlights the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. Saoirse is an example of courage and determination. Despite betrayals, abandonment, and a devastating illness, she never loses sight of her mission to protect and care for Felix. Her dedication is a powerful reminder of how love can transcend even the darkest circumstances. Felix's journey is also deeply inspiring. Through the guidance of his mother and his uncle Isaac, he learns to be strong, fair, and compassionate. He faces the shadow of paternal abandonment and greed, but chooses the path of kindness and purpose, transforming hardships into opportunities to help others. The deeper lesson this story teaches is that love and kindness are transformative forces. Although life can be cruel and unfair, there is always the possibility of finding hope and building a meaningful future when you act with generosity and courage. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.